a light and noise experiment here on podcasts. I'm talking to you from my balcony in Bordeaux, and it's noisy. We'll see how we get on with the sound, but it'll make me speak more loudly. I tend to be a quiet person. Today, on this continued discussion of before we go to war with China, and for that matter, North Korea, and the larger issue of the Chinese way of war, East Asian way of war, we need to look at things which might prevent that struggle from happening. Things that either are conditional to the whole process or specific aspects of it which serve as a kind of break. The larger picture was suggested by a former student of mine, a Central European, who was making a very good fist of his entrepreneurial career in Southeast Asia. And I asked him about the prospect of a war between China and Taiwan, in other words, a Chinese attempt to eliminate the people of the Republic of China, the regime on Taipei. As we've explained earlier, that's the point of this. It's not Taiwan per se. It's the regime on Taiwan. These are struggles, civil war, in effect, between the alternative competing regimes. And his point was, well, Taipei is the repository of some of the finest of all Chinese artworks from the imperial palaces. When the Republic of Chinese regime retreated from the mainland, having been defeated by the Congress, they brought this with them. And so Taipei has this formidable collection. And my friend said, my student said, it's inconceivable to him that the People's Republic Air Force would bomb Taipei, certainly central Taipei, with any chance whatever of doing damage to this priceless artistic inheritance. Point. Interesting. Not often mentioned, but interesting we're looking at. Related to this is this notion of those things, those social, political, economic things which break the impulse, which restrain the impulse to conflict. And one of these has come up, oddly enough, or perhaps not oddly enough, in the Epstein files. Now, the Epstein files revealed, apparently, if you look at this ton of information, and I'm relying upon Chinese sources for this, suggests that J.P. Morgan had a preeminent place of access to Chinese power. I mean, their officials were meeting the most senior officials in China, the Chinese leadership, and were able to report, if the Epstein files are accurate, on the detail of power broking within the Chinese elite, again at the highest level, and for some time now, something more, at least 15 years this has been going on. Now, this notion of the access is an extraordinary revelation because it's almost super-governmental. Does the American government have the same sort of access? If the United States has the same sort of access to Chinese power brokers and has the same leverage, then maybe the Epstein files revelations aren't that important, and maybe J.P. Morgan's not that important. But as it's discussed and presented, it looks like J.P. Morgan is in a lead position, a uniquely privileged position within the American-Chinese power broking game. Now, that's fine, but there's a more predictable feature of this business that relates to the danger of war that really has nothing to do with Epstein files or the fact that J.P. Morgan has such a privileged position within the Chinese economy. And this is odd, this notion. The odd thing about it is that the way this is being presented in social media is that Epstein and his advisors were telling J.P. Morgan how to make deals with the Chinese elite on a personal basis. Now, this strikes me as extremely unlikely, not because J.P. Morgan isn't important or not because any of it isn't infinitely complex and interesting. It's because these are obvious features of the Chinese political system at the elite level. And therefore, why you would have to go to Epstein to be told how China works is odd, except, and there is a slight different in some of the explanations about the American approach to China, Wall Street's approach to China, in the traditional American, we know better, they'll do it our way assumption. And this is a the track record is miserable here, perhaps this is what happened. And oddly enough, interestingly enough, the thing that was tucked away, the one thing that American bankers must not do, is offer gold bars to the Chinese in a sort of crass bribery exercise. Now, if this is what was going on elsewhere, when J.P. Morgan's rivals, then you realize that this is gauche. This is ignorance of how to do business in China. And apparently, through Epstein, the J.P. Morgan people learned how to do it better than anyone else, and therefore achieved a better result than anyone else. But again, odd. Now, what am I talking about here? One of the sub-motifs, or even major motifs, of recent nationalist discussion in the United States and in England is the notion that if white Americans or white English lose majority position, lose their controlling position in national life, there is no bolt hole for the English or the Americans to go to. And this contrasts with Israel, where Jews living in America or England have a bolt hole. They can go to Israel if things get tough. But the English and Americans don't have such a place. So this whole notion of a secure piece of geography, be it Israel or England or America, what have you. The Chinese elite problem reverses that. The Chinese elite problem is not that China is likely to be taken over by foreigners, no. Nor is it like in any sense to be endangered in the ways that, demographically, in the future, or to be persecuted in a way that drives the Israeli determination to have a safe homeland. No, the Chinese elite problem is factional strife. And if you lose factional strife, if your faction loses, then there are various predictable consequences. In a civil war, you may be executed, or asked, insisted to commit suicide. But in non-violent struggles, if you lose out, you are purged. Now, you can be purged sufficiently harshly that something bad happens to you, or you can be sent into exile, or you flee yourself to avert bad things happening to you. So this notion of a bolt hole for a Chinese elite in this model has to be abroad. So there is, you see, the white nationalist, Israeli nationalist reversed. So, what is the primary concern in all this? The children of the elite. So you send your sons and daughters off to elite universities, for example, in the States, or I assume this applies to Great Britain or elsewhere, Australia, what have you. And from that process, they become fluent in English and they network. And the Epstein file suggests, it is a background reading, that this is what J.P. Morgan provided. It's finding jobs for the sons and daughters. Now, there have been previous scandals about this in China, about how this is handled and the corrupt nature involved in this kind of bribery. Nevertheless, you can see how it would work. There is a desperation behind the supposed corruption. And that is, if things suddenly go very bad inside the very highest levels of Chinese power making, and my faction, as I said, loses, at least my kids are secure. They can get on a plane and go to New York or London or where have you, and be safe. They know how it works. They've been educated there. They have a native network. They have perhaps J.P. Morgan helping them, securing them. So this interrelation between the banking system and the political system, for example, or for that matter with Epstein, power broking, and the Chinese political system, these are cultural drags on, social drags, if you will, on the threat of war. One often wonders why the People's Republic has not acted, as you would expect from Confucian logic, to crush the Republic of China government on Taipei, in Taipei, but on Taiwan. And you can see one of the reasons that any member of the Chinese elite knows that something bad may happen to him, and he may be helpless once that bad thing happens. And given that, he needs a bolt hole. And the last thing you want to do is go to war with your bolt hole. And there's the interesting interplay of elite power broking. If the really essential catch net, if things go terribly wrong inside the Politburo in China, and you need to go, at least make sure your kids are safe, then there's going to be an inward hesitation to provoke a war over Taiwan if it puts that bolt hole in danger. Now, it may not. You may be privileged enough, to be wealthy enough that you can ride it out, but you can see. Now, as this applies to every member of the Chinese elite, there are no exceptions in this context because factional strife is such that there are no guarantees. You can be strong, yes, perhaps you're strong enough to think you're untouchable, but history says things are not like that normally. So given that, there's another reason why the war may not come and why why the People's Republic has not crushed the Republic of China. For these very personal, familial, elite reasons at the very height of power broking, power making, power administration, leadership within the People's Republic. And that's the lesson for today from the Epstein files.